With that, unless anyone else has anything they'd like to add, I'd like to invite Michael Nugent to open the case in proposition for the motion that this House would welcome the death of God.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. And the motion is this House would welcome the death of God. Now, on one reading, the wording of that motion would seem to imply that an atheist would have to assume that God exists, and a theist would have to assume that God could die. So I think neither of those are likely. So religions typically get out of those type of dilemmas by assuming that the word is metaphorical. So I think I'll take that approach today. So by welcoming the death of God, I mean welcoming the death of the idea of a God. Because the idea of a God corrupts our search for the truth, and because societies are healthier when there is the least belief in gods. So let's start with the idea of how the idea of gods corrupts our search for the truth. It does this by requiring us to use faith when we're trying to identify what's most likely to be true about reality. And by faith I mean believing something is true disproportionately to the currently best available evidence. And faith is the least reliable way of determining what's most likely to be true, because faith results in different people coming to different beliefs about the same reality. Whereas applying reason to evidence is a far more reliable way of identifying what's likely to be true, because it more reliably results in different people coming to the same beliefs about the same reality. And when we apply reason to evidence about the idea of gods, we notice three things. Firstly, the idea of God encourages us to believe implausible things about very big questions. Secondly, it corrupts our understanding of reality. And thirdly, it corrupts our understanding of morality. And I'll go over those three arguments briefly. Firstly, it encourages us to believe implausible answers to big questions. Now, we know in terms of the literalist idea of gods, as in sacred scriptures and so on, we know how implausible those are. They involve a God that's three people in one person, who impregnates a virgin human being on the planet Earth in order to give birth to himself. It involves Muhammad flying on a winged horse and splitting the moon in two, and it involves Joseph Smith talking to God through his hat and wearing magic underpants. Now, even Tony, I suspect, doesn't believe that that type of almost caricature God exists. So I'm assuming what we're talking about today is the more sophisticated idea of a God, which typically involves a more mysterious being that is typically a pure mind without a body, that is perfect and changeless, beyond time and space, all-knowing, all good and all powerful. They seem to be the three the various attributes that are typically attributed to that type of a God. But a pure mind without a body is an invented convenience, because we've no evidence that a mind can exist without a body, or without a brain, or without an energy source. And we've lots of evidence to suggest that it can't. And even if we explore this invented convenience, a pure mind without a body might be aware of the existence of matter, but wouldn't be able to do anything, because it wouldn't have any mechanism with which it could interact with that matter. If this pure mind is perfect, then it wouldn't create anything, because being perfect, it would have no need or desire to do anything. If it is changeless, then it can't create anything, because the mind would have to change in order to do so. If this mind is beyond time and space, then it can't cause anything to happen, because cause and effect involve time and space. And if the God is all-knowing, all-powerful and all-good, then it would have created a perfect universe. And at a minimum, a perfect universe would not contain suffering or evil. So those are the type of implausible beliefs that the idea of God encourages us to accept on faith. On top of that, it corrupts our understanding of reality when compared to the understanding of reality that we get through applying reason to evidence. Theists typically believe that this God created the universe with a purpose. But we don't see any purpose in the universe. We don't see the universe moving towards any purpose. Instead, we mostly see impersonal forces pushing and pulling particles around, and mostly moving towards a state of increasing disorder. Theists typically believe that this God has a special relationship with human beings on the planet Earth. But instead, what we see is a universe of 100 billion galaxies, each of which is 100 billion stars like our sun, incredibly wasteful for such an imagined purpose. Even if it did exist, this God would have wasted almost all of 14 billion years of time and almost all of 100 billion galaxies of space for this supposed human-focused plan on planet Earth. Even on planet Earth, theists believe that this God created human life as more special than other forms of life. But we know that we're just one evolved species among many on this planet. There have been 5 billion species on this planet. 99% of them are now extinct. Humans are just one of the remaining 50 million species, and our survival is as precarious as any of those other species. But what we have done as a species is we have evolved the capacity to apply reason to evidence. And that enables us to understand more clearly how the universe functions on a natural basis, and to move ever closer to, in the words of this motion, to the death of the idea of a God. That astoundingly self-important belief that we humans, alone on our planet, alone in our solar system, alone in our galaxy, alone in the universe, are the only living beings that have been given this supposedly immortal soul by the creator of the universe. The third question, and possibly the most significant in terms of our behaviour, is the idea of a God corrupts our understanding of morality. Now, by morality, what I mean by morality is how we deal with other sentient beings. That an outcome is objectively bad if it harms another sentient being, and a behaviour is objectively wrong if the agent unjustly harms another sentient being. Now, if there was an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God that was the source of morality and that cared about human beings on the planet Earth, then at a minimum, at an absolute rock bottom minimum, we would expect that being to be able to convey the same moral messages to everybody in different places and different times. However, if there was no God, what we would expect to see is that different sets of people at different places around the world and at different times throughout history would evolve different codes of morality. And that is indeed what we do see. So in parallel to applying reason to the evidence of reality, in order to try to understand what's most likely to be objectively true about the nature of reality, we can apply reason to the evidence of our behaviour in order to try to understand what's most likely to be objectively true about morality. And it is simply false to suggest that you need to invoke gods in order to do that. There are many approaches to moral philosophy that don't invoke gods. And the one that I come closest to subscribing to myself as a variation on John Rawls' social contract theory of morality, which is essentially that if you hypothesize a group of perfectly rational people and you ask that set of perfectly rational people to design principles of justice for a society, but when doing so they don't know while they are coming up with those rules what role they will have within that society. They don't know whether they'll be rich or poor. They don't know whether they'll be male or female. They don't know whether they'll be sick or healthy. That provides them with a veil of ignorance that enables them to be impartial in developing as close as we can get to universally just principles. Now, I personally add an extra layer to Rawls' theory, which is I think they shouldn't know what species they are either, because I think one of the greatest moral crimes of all generations now is the way human beings have exploited non-human animals. So in any given circumstance, it's already hard enough to try to figure out, even with that, what the right thing to do is, because there's so many evolved attributes of morality in terms of empathy, compassion, cooperation, fairness, reciprocity, justice, and the interaction of different behaviours and multi-layered consequences. It's pretty hard at the best of times to figure out what the right thing to do is in a lot of circumstances. But what the idea of a God does is it corrupts that already difficult task by adding in imaginary, supposed supernatural commands that are unrelated to those, and makes it even more difficult. Not only is belief in God not needed for objective morality, but belief in a God can corrupt our rational search for objective morality. And all of this is supported in the fact that societies are healthier when there is less belief in God. The World's Values Survey shows how that happens. When people are focused on survival values, traditional religious values are stronger in society. As people move towards self-expression values, societies move away from traditional religious values and towards secular rational values. And the type of things that trigger that are investment in health, education, communications technology, moves towards democracy. Other studies show that secular and atheist people are on average less racist, less authoritarian, less dogmatic, less homophobic, less sectarian. And secular societies have lower rates of murders and abortions and teenage pregnancies and other social outcomes. And whatever way the cause and effect works there, the correlation is certainly welcome. So to conclude, we should welcome the death of the idea of a God. Because firstly, it's almost certainly false. Secondly, it corrupts our search for truth about reality and morality by requiring us to use faith instead of reason to try to answer big questions, and societies are healthier where there is less belief in God. So for those reasons, I'm happy to propose the motion. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Mr. Nugent for his speech and invite Father Tony Flannery to open the case for the opposition.
So good evening to you all. Nice to be here with you. It brings back memories of my time in UCG, as we used to call it, when we had the Lit and Deb in the Greek Hall. I don't know, does it still exist? Does it not? Gee, boy, we had fun in the late 60s in the Greek Hall. And I can tell you, we didn't have polite, quiet audiences like you. So I know what has happened to you. It's good to be here. As Mark said, I'm out of ministry as a priest, so for the last 5 years I haven't been able to speak in churches or to do anything priestly, so it's good to have people who are foolish enough to listen to me. Having said that, I'm a bit uncomfortable being here because really I think debating about God is about as futile an exercise as you could possibly indulge in. Because, well, for a number of reasons. I'm a lot less certain about any of this now than I was when I was your age. When I was your age, I'd have been able to say a lot of things that I believed for certain about God. Now I'd say very little that I believe, except this, that it is such a bloody big mystery, the whole thing. Life, and its meaning and its purpose and the universe and the whole way that it operates. It's an enormous mystery. But increasingly, again, as I get older, and I'm 70, I put another word with the mystery. I put the word wonderful. Because I think life is wonderful. I haven't much of it left. But by God, I'm enjoying it right now. And the Vatican actually has done me a favour. It has set me free from the bonds of an institution. So it's good. So my faith is radically different now. My image of God is radically different now to what it was. So what do I believe in now? For starters, I'd never attack what Michael believes. I'd say, good on you, Michael, and if you find purpose and meaning in life in that, great. And the same with yourselves. I don't want to convince any of you that there is a God. The whole notion of God being dead goes back a long time. Friedrich Nietzsche declared the death of God in 1882, and many people have since then. And a lot of people believe that, and that's grand with me. I don't. In the last century or so, cosmology has taught us an enormous amount about the universe. And I find that fascinating. For instance, that the universe is in existence for 13.8 billion years. Traditionally, we believe that God created the world in 6 days about 6,000 years ago. That was all figurative. Creation is a continuing reality in the universe. And that's an amazing thought. Creation is going on every moment of every day for 13.8 billion years. We humans, we're only on the earth for about 150 million. 5 minutes before midnight, as they say, if you take the span of creation being the length of a day. But we're not insignificant. Because the God that I believe in now is a God who's not up in heaven. All that again is figurative, metaphorical language. A God who is at the heart of creation. Let me just read one little quote for you. This is from a writer that I have great value in, a guy called Kevin Treston. He's in Australia. Nowadays, science finds itself speaking in terms of mystery and wonder as it tries to explain the how and the why of reality. Now, I love that because that's where I'm at too. That's me. Mystery and wonder as I try to explain the whole damn thing, including myself. How and why, at the deepest level of matter, particles get together with other particles to form atoms. Atoms get together with other atoms to form molecules. Molecules get together with others to form single cells, and single cells get together to form multicellular life. The minutiae of life are extraordinary. Your body is not really matter. It's made up 60% of energy. Atoms and molecules and particles constantly on the move and constantly interacting with each other to make you what you are. Think. I'm not used to speaking now, so I'm, again, thanks to the Vatican, but anyway. How, for example, and now this is talking about a child growing in a woman's womb. How, for example, do 60 trillion cells in our bodies know what to do? How do some cells in an embryo know to form a set of ears? And other cells produce a heart, and other cells produce kidneys. It's extraordinary and it's wonderful. And I choose to believe that at the heart of this constant creation that's going on all around us and within us, there is a consciousness directing it all. Put any word you like to it. I don't like the word God because it carries too much baggage from the past. I prefer to talk about, no words are adequate, but I prefer to talk about divine energy or divine love, because for me, love is at the heart of all of it. Thomas Merton, one of the great mystics of the last century, said, when we talk about, let I get the quote exactly, anything we say about God is more unlike God than like God. In the last 10 minutes, I've made one hell of a poor attempt to explain the mystery of it all. But that's the best I can do. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Father Tony Flannery for those words, and would like to invite back Michael Nugent for a few minutes just to offer a few points of rebuttal.
Okay, well, you see, this is one of the difficulties with such a moving target as the idea of a God, is I kind of agree with almost everything that you said there, Tony, but I don't attribute any gods to any of that.
Which is fine. But
yeah, I think it's what you're talking about is the mystery of life rather than the mystery of God. And there's certainly several very big mysteries yet that we don't understand. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang. We don't know how life began on Earth. We know how the universe evolved after the Big Bang, and we know how life evolved after it started, but we don't know what caused both of those things to happen. We don't know how consciousness operates. So there's a lot of big things that are still mysteries. But the best way to approach finding out the answer to those mysteries is the scientific method. It's not faith, and it's not choosing to believe that there's a consciousness. Because every generation we find out more and more how things that we used to think were mysteries actually happen naturally. And every generation, the bits that we haven't yet figured out are attributed to gods. So the idea of creation being a continuing reality, again, that comes back to what do you mean by creation? I mean, certainly the rearrangement of atoms and the rearrangement of the stuff of the universe is constantly happening. And there are forces behind that, the main one of which is gravity rather than a god. But that is happening. But that's not the same thing as what theists typically mean by creation in terms of God, which is creating something out of nothing at the start. We don't know we don't know whether the universe is eternal. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang. We don't know how many universes that there might be. But there's no need to invoke the idea of a God while we're trying to figure out that. And then the bit about how do cells know. Cells don't know what they're doing. They don't have a purpose. There are DNA codes that cause cells to react in a certain way, and then depending on what cells they're interacting with, they create certain outcomes, or they cause certain outcomes to happen. But it is evolution that causes what seems to be the design of natural beings to happen. It is evolution, because when genetic mutations happen, if they're advantageous, then they will continue into the next generation. If they're not advantageous, then the beings that have them will die before they reach the stage of reproducing. And so over the billions of years that we have of the scale of the universe, we have gradually, bit by bit, things that creates the illusion of design, but it's not actually design. And the final point that I would make is because, as I say, I agree with almost everything that you say about the nature of the universe and the wonder and the puzzles of it. But there's absolutely no need to invoke gods to try to answer that. And indeed, invoking gods just complicates and corrupts the process of trying to find out the answers to the mystery, which we will find out through applying reason to evidence. And I mean, ultimately, what Tony is kind of, we're almost on the same side here. I mean, ultimately, what people typically call God seems to be something that Tony and I would agree doesn't exist in reality, and we seem to pretty much agree on a lot of things, but just put different names to it. So I think that the idea of God as typically understood, I would welcome the death of. The type of things that Tony is talking about, I think, are very useful, but I wouldn't put the name God on them at all. Thank you very much.
So no debate.
we can debate the word.
I suppose the one thing, that's true, and that's what I mean. Like, I grew up believing in this God in the sky who would pass judgment on all of us and that. But now, it isn't that I'm contradicting the Bible or anything. I'm just reinterpreting the Bible, and most scholars nowadays are doing the same thing. That the great majority of what's in the Bible is actually figurative, metaphorical language, never meant to be taken literally. And the big curse of the Christian teaching is that it took so much of it literally. And we're only gradually beginning to realize now that we have to get away from that, because when, like a lot of the Bible stories, for instance, are metaphorical stories, containing a very rich and deep meaning. But if you interpret them literally, you actually lose the richness of the meaning. So this is where a lot of the problem is. Yeah, I'd say Michael and myself would agree with a lot. One big difference, though, is the question of faith. I choose to believe that at the heart of this mystery, that there is this being, and that this being pervades the whole of life and pervades each one of us. And that as a consequence of that my destiny and your destiny is to be a part of this wonderful being for all eternity. Now that makes a fairly substantial difference. I think that faith is very important in life. Like, for instance, I've been a priest all my life, but I have a very close friendship with a woman for the last 40 years, which has been one of the bedrocks of my life, and I can tell you right now is even more so. Now, I couldn't for a moment prove that she loves me, but I know she does. I believe she does. And all sorts of areas like that in life. We can't prove them, but we need to have faith in order to find meaning and purpose and richness in life. And that's why I believe in this wonderful being at the heart of creation, and that in some beautiful way that I am part of that, and that I am being held in the palm of the hand of that being, and that's figurative language. Thank you.
But with that, we go back to our formal speakers, and I'd like to invite Tony Flannery to take the podium again to complete the case. Rob.
Thanks, Matt. Well, you have great sense of endurance to be still here, and I'm not going to bother you anymore. Quick comment on the Bible. It's an extraordinarily complex document, and most of the problems in Christianity for the last 2,000 years have been brought about by literal interpretations of the Bible. It is a largely metaphorical book, and it is culturally conditioned, and that's a crucial aspect of it. So if you're going to talk about the Bible, you need to study a bit about it, because it is a very difficult one. Having said that, let me just say to the younger, I leave you out of it, you're my age group. All the indications are that your lives, and please God you'll live to be my age and older, that you'll live through a much more uncertain time than my generation lived through. Two things will be crucial. That insofar as you possibly can, whatever you believe in, that it's a belief that inspires you to respect everybody else, whatever their views or lifestyles are. That's going to be crucial. And there's so much happening in the world at the moment that's contrary to that, and is very frightening. And the second equally important thing will be that you will have great care for creation. Because if you don't, my generation didn't, and we've caused enormous destruction. If you continue as we did, you will probably destroy the whole of the earth. So they're the two big things. Whatever belief you have, they're the crucial ones. And thanks very much.
I'd like to thank Father Tony Flannery for closing the case for opposition, and I welcome Michael Nugent to close the case for the proposition. Thanks.
I'd like to start for apologising for not being either raging enough or despairing enough for those who have caricatures of atheism, but there you go. All that I'm proposing is that we shape our beliefs proportionately to the currently best available evidence. If that currently best available evidence was to lead me in the direction of believing that there was a God, then I would believe that there's a God. But it doesn't. And the idea of comparing it, I've found a couple of things I can disagree with you on now, by the way. The idea of comparing it to, the love for another person, I presume that love is based proportionally on your interaction with her, and you realise from her behaviour and from your interaction. But if she was behaving towards you the way that that various variations of God behave towards humankind, you might not believe that she loved you. So it's just forming our beliefs proportionally to the evidence. I think the idea of interpreting the Bible as well is I think it's really more identifying parts of the Bible that fit with your existing beliefs, and you interpret those as being the true parts of the Bible, but you reject, you say, love thy neighbour as thyself, it's clearly good. Stone a man to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath, something wrong with that. I have to interpret that in some way to make it consistent with why it's in the Bible. Is it there for one people at one time? Is it a metaphor? Is it whatever? But the key point is, it's not how you interpret it. The very fact that you notice a difference between a moral judgment in the Bible that is clearly good and a moral judgment that you have to make some interpretation of shows that you are applying your own morality to the Bible. You're not getting your morality from it, you're applying your morality to it. And similarly with other scriptures. I'd like to just briefly touch on some points. Some points were very valid that were made by some people. I think Connor's point was ideal, that the word God is really at the core of it. I mean, the word God, unfortunately, it's kind of like whatever you're having yourself, and so the debate goes nowhere really, because everybody is looking at it from the perspective of their own interpretation. It might be, here's a challenge for you as a debating society: figure out a motion to put to your society that you are debating the ideas that we're talking about tonight, but nobody's allowed to use the word God. And that would be a much more interesting debate, because it would identify what people really believe, as opposed to throwing around the same word and applying it indiscriminately to everything. Fikra, loads of things on the internet. I just looked during the thing on how to make a bicycle. Just specific curiosity. I just couldn't help checking, just out of curiosity. And finally, there's a couple of things that some points that Jordan made. Is it Jordan? Yeah, Jordan. When you're talking about the death of ignorance, I think you're right. I am talking about the death of ignorance, but I think that faith contributes to ignorance, because faith subverts the process that takes us away from ignorance. Faith creates a conclusion before you get to the conclusion, and what we need to do is apply reason to evidence. And the test, as I said before, the test is that when people use faith to come to conclusions, different people come to different beliefs about the same reality. Whereas when people apply reason to evidence, different people come to the same beliefs about the same reality. And that shows that applying reason to evidence is a more reliable way of approaching the truth. Now, we may never approach the actual truth, but we can reliably get closer to it by that method. Certainly, I'm not suggesting that we should be taking away the freedom to believe. Atheist Ireland strongly supports the right to freedom of religion. We work alongside the Evangelical Alliance of Ireland and the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community of Ireland in promoting freedom of religion and belief and secularism, both in Ireland and recently at the United Nations when they were questioning Pakistan's human rights record. The three of us went over as three groups of Ireland, speaking out for Christians and atheists and Ahmadiyya Muslims in Pakistan who are persecuted but can't speak out themselves for obvious reasons, and we went over to speak out for them. We had an information stand, a joint information stand here in Galway a few months ago with Atheist Ireland and the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community of Ireland. So we strongly support the right to freedom of religion and belief. When I say I would welcome the death of the idea of God, the only context in which I would welcome that is if people themselves come to that conclusion. I wouldn't be trying to force people into not practicing their religion. And finally, in terms of, do I think it would remove all problems? Of course I don't. If I was asked here that this house would welcome the death of fascism, or the unregulated free market, or any other secular project that also depends on faith and dogma in the way that religion does, I would also be speaking out against those. I think faith and dogma are harmful, whether they're applied to religious beliefs or to secular beliefs. But the reason that religious beliefs are more dangerous is that when secular beliefs are pursued using faith and dogma, they eventually bump into reality. And people notice that it's not working and they're forced to revise their beliefs. Whereas religious beliefs hide their testability in an imaginary afterlife, and so they manage to keep going for longer than they would if they had the checks and balances that secular beliefs have. So to conclude, I'll just conclude by repeating my main thesis here tonight, that we should welcome the death of the idea of God, because the idea of a God corrupts our search for truth by requiring us to use faith rather than applying evidence to reason when trying to answer big questions, and by doing that it corrupts our understanding of reality and our understanding of morality, and societies are provably healthier and have better social outcomes when there is less belief in gods. And I accept the point, I made the point myself, I'm not saying that's causation. I said it's a correlation. The causation may be going in either direction, but whichever direction the causation is going to, whether it's that lack of religion causes people to behave better, or whether it's that when people behave better, it means that they are relying less on religion, it would still be a useful indicator for a better society if there was no more beliefs in the idea of God. Thank you very much.